I will start. Welcome everybody, benvenuti a tutti a questo incontro dal titolo Ossitocina e gli strumenti di misurazione della fiducia. Abbiamo degli ospiti oggi che vorrei iniziare a introdurre. Allora, innanzitutto vedete collegato il dottor Kenneth NOWACK, collegato dalla California, è uno psicologo certificato e cofondatore Chief Research Officer di Envisia Learning. Ha conseguito un PhD in Counseling Psychology presso l'Università della California a Los Angeles e ha pubblicato numerosi lavori nell'area della psicologia della salute, della medicina comportamentale, dell'assessment e del feedback a 360 gradi. Ken fa parte del Consortium for Research on Emotional Intelligence in Organizations di Daniel Goleman, è Chief Editor del Consulting Psychology Journal ed è membro dell'American Psychological Association, dove afferisce alla divisione 13, che è la Society of Counseling Psychology. Insieme a lui abbiamo il piacere di ospitare e li ringraziamo per aver reso possibile questo momento Patrizia Ebril e Giancarlo Bolognesi, che sono rispettivamente fondatrice, CEO e partner di Initiative. Initiative è nata nel 1999 ed è una società di consulenza di direzione aziendale che ha sede a Torino e opera per lo sviluppo delle risorse umane e per il cambiamento e il miglioramento delle organizzazioni. A Initiative vengono riconosciute incisività e concretezza delle soluzioni e degli strumenti forniti, unitamente a comprensione del contesto azienda che le permette di operare con ottima personalizzazione sulle problematiche aziendali. Initiative fa parte dei network internazionali Facet 5 e Envisia Learning. Quindi, insomma, grazie a tutti voi per essere presenti qui oggi. Lascerei la parola adesso a Patrizia di Initiative per presentare, insomma, con un tocco più personale rispetto a quanto potrei fare io, il dottor Novak. Grazie ancora a tutti per essere qui.
Grazie a voi.
Grazie Claudia, buongiorno a tutti, è veramente un piacere grandissimo quello di poter condividere oggi con voi l'esperienza fantastica che noi di Initiative abbiamo ormai da tantissimi anni di dialogare con Ken su tematiche base per le persone, sia da un punto di vista personale, umano e professionale. La prima volta in cui incontrammo Ken risale all'ottobre 2013, quindi da allora a oggi abbiamo avuto moltissime occasioni di incontro, di studio, di confronto. Non voglio prendere io la scena, l'unico elemento che mi sento di sottolineare della grande stima professionale e umana che noi di Initiative abbiamo verso Ken è la sua umanità, la sua capacità di trasferire concetti complessi con estrema semplicità, fornendo grandissimo valore aggiunto a chi lo ascolta. Quindi mi auguro veramente che questo possa essere un momento bello di apprendimento e di valore umano per tutti voi. Grazie della vostra presenza e dell'interesse che sono certa avrete nell'ascoltare Ken. So Ken, it's time for you to introduce yourself and what you've been preparing and studying for years and years, summarized today for us. Thank you, Ken.
Grazie, Patrizia. Grazie, Professor. Buonasera. Thank you for having me today. I'm hoping you can all see my screen and slides, and I know it's difficult, particularly to hear somebody in another language, so I will try to speak slowly, and we will have some time at the end for some questions. And what I've prepared today is to discuss the science of something that's very important to my life and my research, and to share some of our assessment tools at an organization, team, and leadership level. And we'll end the presentation with any questions you may have. And I would certainly encourage you, if you have access to this social teams site, to enter questions as well in the chat. I wanted to share a story of one of the things that my wife and I have been involved in for 20 years. We volunteer to raise service dogs or guide dogs for the blind. And during the COVID year and a half or 2 years, we've raised our 10th guide dog, and we get the little puppy when he is about 6 to 8 weeks old. And you could see his picture on the left. And his name is Vespa, very much in an Italian spirit. He was in the litter that started with the alphabetical letter V. And so we really love the name. And certainly every time I've traveled to Italy, one of my fantastic memories was actually renting some Vespas in Tuscany, where we spent a day just basically driving and drinking. Not a very good recommendation, but we did that. So Vespa has now been returned. He is now almost 2 years old, and he will begin his formal leadership training to become a guide for somebody who is blind. And the reason this is so important to the topic today and so important in my life is if you can visualize an individual that has no sight and is dependent on a dog to take them to the train, to a bus, to go to the market to buy groceries and food, they have total trust that these animals will help them to be independent and to be autonomous and to have a high quality of life. But the interaction between somebody that is blind and these dogs is unbelievable. And it's given me quite a bit of a spirit and an interest to continue my research on how trust between human beings, perhaps in this case, a dog, is very much the fabric of everything we do in life. So I just wanted to share this personal story of one of the things that my wife and I have been doing for many years that illustrates how important trust is in relationships. We have written, I've written quite a bit of academic and non-academic articles, a lot with a colleague of mine who is not able to be with me today. He is a professor here in California and a world-renowned neuroscientist. His name is Paul Zak, and we have collaborated on many research articles and laboratory studies. A little bit I will share with you today. I just wanted to give you some screenshots of some of the recent articles and work that we've been doing in the trust and this particular area. So I'll discuss many of these today. And again, thank you, grazie, for having me to discuss a little bit. I want to just suggest that humans are wired biologically to have 6 very important evolutionary drives. And these are key drives that really have a lot to do with how we survive over millions of years as a human species. I'm going to talk about one today that's more important in our relationships with others, and it's related to the second one that you see on this list. It is our innate need as humans to connect with another human being. And I think all of us, whether you're in Italy, whether you're in the United States during COVID, have been very much challenged to get out of our house, to go back to class, to socialize with our friends, to do the things that we take for granted. And our biological need to connect, to interact, to socialize is built into our DNA. It's built into our wiring. And it's one of the reasons the topic of trusting another human being is very much part of our human need and our reason for surviving. And we do find that the relationship between social connection, this biological need to be treated in a manner that's caring, to be treated with respect, to be treated in a way that people care about us, is in fact a very strong predictor of how healthy we will be. Social support is one area that I've done some research as a health psychologist and clinical psychologist and organizational psychologist for many years. And we do find, again, some very strong research showing that we need other human beings, and we need to be treated in a manner that is civil, is one that is respectful. So I want to shift and talk a little bit about trust in my research with teams, and I want to define a team as a team of two, a human being and their dog. It could be a group project that you're doing as part of your MBA program. It can be things you're doing in work, in organizations. But today we find, particularly with this experiment of COVID, that teams are in fact the future. Teams have always been the fabric of work, but they will become more important today as we see globally working remotely, working together. And even as we're experiencing this presentation today, I am sitting very close to the beach in Santa Monica, and you're sitting in a classroom many, many miles away, but we're interacting as one learning team at this time. I want to suggest that our research and work looks at two very fundamental, we call them foundations of effective teams. And I'll spend a little bit of time defining these labels and words in just a moment, but we believe that without trust and without the ability for teams and individual members to have emotional awareness, to be able to read other people verbally and non-verbally, to anticipate what they will do, teams will not function very well. So these are the two components that our research has focused on, and we believe they are foundations. They do not guarantee that a team will be effective, but they're necessary conditions for all teams and even families to function very well. So I'll share more about these two labels, but this will be my focus today and our research from a neuroscience and brain science behind each of these. So let me define and talk about two labels. One is called psychological safety, and the other is called interpersonal trust. And I'm going to argue that the biology and the neurobiology behind these two labels are exactly the same, but these labels mean something very different. On the left, I'm going to define the word psychological safety is the extent to which I believe you will treat me civilly and treat me with caring and respect if I behave a particular way in interacting with you. So this is your perception of how safe you believe you can behave with another individual. Can you share your thoughts? Can you provide feedback? Can you suggest that you disagree? Do you feel comfortable behaving in a way that you are authentic? And when we see psychological safety, we find people, when they do it well, can in fact make mistakes. They can grow, they can learn, they can challenge ideas and opinions, they can assert their own. So psychological safety is a belief you have that allows you the freedom to behave with another individual in a manner that you would like to. And in individuals with low psychological safety, we find that they have an inhibition. They feel very unsafe to risk taking a chance to share their point of view. On the other side, we find this label interpersonal trust. And this is the empowering that we provide another individual to do things on our behalf, and we have to be very comfortable with the unknown. For example, if you have to have an operation, you will find a very world-renowned and very famous surgeon in Italy and feel comfortable that their knowledge and their skills and their reputation will allow him or her to proceed with their operation on you in a manner that you have faith that you will be cured, you will be better, your whatever they're working on will be improved. So interpersonal trust and psychological safety are two sides of this word we call trust, and the neuroscience behind both are quite interesting. I'll be brief, but I'm very fascinated on how we come to defining these labels and what's happening at the brain level to feel both psychologically safe, believing it's okay for me to behave in a particular way, and more passively interpersonal trust, empowering another individual, and having confidence that I won't know what the outcome is, but I believe that you possess knowledge and skills and capabilities and experiences that will allow you to do great work, whatever your profession is. So these are two words I'll be using today, and I want to share a little bit about the science behind it. There are several books that have been written on the topic of psychological safety. This is not a new term or a new label. It's actually been in the psychological literature for, maybe 50 years now. And we do find that there's many individuals that have begun to popularize, to make this label very well known. We talk a lot in organizational and consulting psychology today with this label. And it became very famous in 2012 when a company worldwide, now called Alphabet, but we know them as Google, did a project in which they studied 180 internal teams, different teams that worked on different projects at Google, not just the search engine, but all their other things that they actually design and develop. And their question was, what were the components that made some teams more innovative, some teams more creative, some teams more effective? And they actually held focus groups and did surveys for more than a year, and then summarized all the data. And the one factor they found that differentiated, really compared high performance to low performance teams, high effective to low effective teams, was psychological safety. In those teams, although there were other ingredients and factors that were very important, they identified that the ability for team members to challenge each other, to share ideas, to constructively confront, to give feedback to each other, and even make mistakes was what identified Google as the best teams. So from that point on, this label has become quite popular everywhere in the world. And it's an area that we've done quite a bit of research. And as you'll see, some of the assessment tools we've created measure very specifically psychological safety as it relates to teamwork. But there's many resources if you're interested. I could share with Professor later. If you want to read some books or other articles, I'll be happy to share. So let me spend a few minutes to talk about the brain and what is behind this perception that I feel safe with another human being, that I can interact in a manner that I don't feel threatened. And this has implications not just for teams, but for politics and world relations as well. So what is the science behind psychological safety? And I want to share a study that was done at the college I graduated for my doctoral program that occurred several years ago. And the researcher's name is Naomi Eisenberger. And she was at the University of California and still is Los Angeles. And she created the first study that brought students actually into her laboratory and played a game that's called cyber ball. So think of football and think of the game that you've played when you were adolescents, and maybe some of you still play for fun. Where you would kick a soccer ball to one friend, they would kick the ball to another friend, and then it would come back to be kicked to you, and you would play this game as a child for hours and hours and hours and have great fun. Well, in the lab, Naomi brought in students and told them she was going to conduct a study where she was able to measure what was occurring in their brain while they were playing a game with another human being. And rather than kicking the ball, they used a computer and would click on a button that would change the speed and the direction of the ball. So think of this as a video football game. And what was not shared with the students is she took one of the students and said, I'll be right back. I'm going to take Patrizia into an area where I can put on a portable machine on her brain called functional magnetic resonance imagery, fMRI, and it will record actually the blood flow of the brain while Patrizia plays this football game with the rest of you. And what was not shared with Patrizia is she was in a lab and now was wearing a cap that was recording blood flow in her brain and a keyboard to actually play this football game. Was she thought she was playing with the 2 or 3 other students that she had just met. but in reality, the game is played on a computer. And the way the game starts is just as I shared with you. Patrizia would kick it to Giancarlo. Giancarlo would kick it to Professor. Professor would kick it to me. And we would play this game for a few minutes, and it would be quite fun. And then after a few minutes, Naomi would change the rules of this video game, and Patrizia would kick the ball again to Giancarlo. Giancarlo would kick the ball on the computer to Professor, but Professor would not kick the ball back to me. In fact, what it appears is Professor would now kick the ball to Patrizia, and the three of them would play together for several minutes, and they have excluded me. I have been locked out. I've been given a red card and not been able to play this soccer game with the rest of the students. And the experiment stops at that point. And Naomi has repeated this study, and it's been done worldwide many, many times. And she asked the students that were playing the game how they felt when they were excluded. And as you would expect, they were puzzled. They were frustrated. They felt as if they made a mistake in playing this game. Maybe they pressed the speed too fast or the direction incorrectly. They were all reported, 100% of the students reported feeling disappointment and even hurt that they were excluded from the game. So this finding is not surprising. If you've posted any pictures or things to share on social media, whether it's Instagram or TikTok or whatever you're using to share, and if nobody responds or you have people that respond negatively, we feel this sense of hurt. We feel this sense of being criticized. But what Naomi found, and her lab was the very first to identify this, is when she looked at what was occurring at a brain level, she found that the areas of the brain that were activated corresponded to the pain matrix when people were excluded from the game. So not only were the students sharing they were hurt, they were also illustrating at a brain level that they were feeling physical pain. So when we interact with another human being and we feel as if our ideas have been rejected, when we feel we've been evaluated negatively, when we have been bullied by somebody who is criticizing us and making fun of us, it just doesn't hurt at an emotional level. It triggers and activates the same areas of the brain that are related to physical pain. So this is the power of psychological safety. When we are in a group, when we're in a team, we're in a family, and we feel somebody is picked on us, they've bullied us, they've evaluated, they've criticized us, or treated us uncaringly or in a non-civil manner, they are actually evoking not just an emotional reaction, but a physiological reaction. And this is the power of the evolution of the human species, of wanting to be valued, wanting to be respected, and wanting others to care for us. So this is the neuroscience that goes behind psychological safety. It's quite powerful. There's more research I could share, but I'll stop with that. And I will also say in my research work in the world of work, when we work with individuals who are leaders, who are very toxic, who are very critical or very authoritative, very evaluative, very judgmental, and they're just mean, we find that it becomes a very important predictor of our mental health and psychological well-being. And in fact, we believe today with some very well-established studies that leaders in every organization can be a risk factor for our long-term health. So this is one of the reasons I treat leadership practices and leadership behavior in training, in coaching, in selecting leaders for the future, in promoting leaders internally. We would like to have a balance of leaders who possess both great intellect and talent and skills, but also possess emotional intelligence and emotional and social competence. Leaders can, in fact, make a very big difference in the culture of companies. So that's the science behind psychological safety, and I'd like to shift a little bit to talk about the science behind empathy and interpersonal trust. And you'll notice a label here, a chemical called oxytocin. And I'll speak a little bit to this brain peptide that has been around since humans evolved, and we have often thought about oxytocin as related more to women than men, but we also find that men release oxytocin not as much as women, but it is a universal peptide that's been around to keep the human species alive. The word trust, as we can talk about, and I mentioned whether it's a guide dog helping somebody who's blind, whether it's the device in our car that's helping us to navigate, whether it's a robotic arm that we have faith that it will react, whether it's a self-driving car, or whether it's the vaccines that we've been told we should take to help prevent COVID and other illnesses and diseases, we are putting our power and our faith in the unknown. It is with the fabric of interpersonal relationships that you will, in fact, be comfortable with what you don't know. And if we think of what the currency of trust is, we can exchange euros, we can exchange dollars, but in terms of the science of interpersonal relationship, the currency of trust is how we treat and interact with each other. That is the fabric of how each of our relationships, whether it's at school, whether it's at home, or whether it's at work, actually works. And it starts with our brain. And our brain has been wired for hundreds of millions of years to do two things, and two things only. One is to prevent pain, and the other is to seek pleasure. And if you're familiar with the Star Wars movies, I like to use a visual analogy of the side of the brain, the areas of the brain are very powerful to protect us from pain. This is the evolution of our brain, and one of the strongest things that our brain will automatically do is to perceive harm and potential danger in others, particularly those that are different from us, and we call this the negativity bias. Our brain is wired to protect us, and secondly, to seek pleasure and to seek the things that create happiness in life. And today, unfortunately, our older brain, our evolutionary survival brain, the bias is towards making sure we're protected. And this is the elicitation of what is called the fight or flight response. It's built into all of us. In fact, right now, as I'm speaking to you, if we heard a very loud noise in the back of the classroom, within 1/5 of a second, there would be a gap between your evolutionary fight or flight mechanism to help prepare you to literally stand up and run out the classroom and make sure you are safe, between the neocortex, the part of our brain that's evolved to give us judgment and wisdom and to consider the rational decision making that we make. It would be a gap of 1/5 of a second between the fight or flight mechanism creating the survival that we may need and the newer part of our brain, the areas that again relate to decision making and judgment, to think about what was that noise. Oh, it was just nothing. It was some garbage truck that was outside the room, or a student that actually just dropped something that created a loud noise. We are not in any harm or danger. And this is, again, this concept that our brain is wired immediately to protect us in the face of individuals and situations that seem very dangerous and very harmful. And this is the way we've evolved as a human species in a positive way for, again, hundreds of millions of years. So the biology of trust is very important. And I want to share a very interesting and very brief protocol, another study that was first done over 20 years ago by my colleague, Paul Zak, in his laboratory here in California. And the way this game works is very simple. We would bring in two students. They could both be male, they could both be female. And before we start the experiment, they will actually be given euro. And let us pretend, for the sake of this example, that they will be given 50 euro each to begin this study. And before the study begins, and they are sitting down in front of a computer, they don't speak to each other, they just interact. The language of today, of course, is to interact on a computer or a smartphone or our tablets. And they will be given 50 euro, And before the experiment begins, Paul will draw blood from both of these individuals. And the way the game is played is the decision maker 1 has 50 euro and decision maker 2 has 50 euro. And decision maker 1 is told that they can share some or all of their money with decision maker 2, and the amount that they will share to decision maker 2 will be multiplied by some factor. So for example, if decision maker 1 elects to give all of his money, in this case, to decision maker 2, we will tell decision maker 1 the money will be doubled that they give away. And if they gave all 50 euro to decision maker 2, they would be left with no euro. But now decision maker 2 would start with 50, and we'd be given the 50 that decision maker 1 had, and then that would be doubled. So they would actually possess 200 euro, and they're told that they can leave the lab with 200 euro, leaving decision maker 1 with no euro, or they can elect to give some or all of the euro back to decision maker 1. So this is a very interesting economic game that's based on the idea of, do I trust decision maker 2? If I do not trust decision maker 2, I'm going to leave the lab with my 50 euro and feel very comfortable. But as you can see, the math of the game, if one trusts decision maker 2, I would trust that they will split in half the money they have, and both of us can leave the lab doubling what we started. So this is the concept of the game, and decision maker 2 has to make a decision. Do I give all of the money back to decision maker 1? That would be very caring, but that would leave them with no euro. Or do I split my 200 euro, so I have 100 euro, and I'll give back 100 to decision maker 1. They've doubled their money, I've doubled my money, and we both have won a great deal in this experiment. So this is the protocol that Paul has used 20 years ago. This study is one of many types of economic trust games. And at the end of the decision that decision maker 2 makes, again, Paul would draw blood. So we have blood that would be analyzed prior to the game beginning, that is the baseline, and blood that would be analyzed at the end of the game to see if there's anything in the blood that has changed. And over 20 years of research with this game, what we have found is the more money that decision maker 1 gives to decision maker 2, the level of one and only one peptide in the blood enhances and increases in decision maker 2, and that happened to be what is called oxytocin. And we've come to identify oxytocin as the brain peptide that really sends a signal that you are safe to interact with. We call this a pro-social peptide. And it is, in fact, the peptide that's related to interpersonal trust. And if I feel as if I've been trusted by another human being, I am more willing to reciprocate and treat that person, again, with kindness and caring to pay forward their generosity. Paul found in his experiments over 20 years that about 2 to 5% of the individuals that are decision maker 2 did not give any euro back to decision maker 1. In fact, 2 to 5% of these students walked out of the lab with 200 euro and did not give any back, leaving decision maker 1 with no euro whatsoever. And when Paul analyzed their blood, he found that oxytocin again increased with the magnitude of how much money was given to decision maker 2. And these 2 to 5% of the students that did not give back any money had a very high level of oxytocin in their blood, but they did not care. They had no empathy and willingness to reciprocate. And we believe today this is the 2 to 5% of the human population that we call sociopathic. These are individuals who can do terrible things and have no feeling. They have no caring. They have no empathetic distress in relation to other individuals. So this is the science behind interpersonal trust. We've come to believe that only one peptide in the brain is related to how I care about another human being and whether I will treat them with caring, with civility, with respect, and that is oxytocin. I want to share what we've learned in our research too about what goes into trusting another human being now that you know the neurobiology that is behind it. And I want to argue that there are 4 very different components of whether or not I will trust an individual to operate on me, to invest my money, to repair my car, to treat me in a way that I really value. And these 4 are things that we have looked at in our research over many years, and we find that these are 4 that are very logical when we think about it. We won't let a surgeon operate on us unless they have the capabilities and the skills and the education and the credentials to become a surgeon. We won't allow people we care about to interact with us if in fact they act very in a non-predictable way and they're not consistent with their behavior. They're erratic. This sends our brain into a fight or flight mode of unpredictability. We also will trust people that extend to us, that treat us with caring and respect, that care who we are and take an interest in us personally and our families. And when that's very genuine, we find it opens the bond that we need at a human level to interact in a very comfortable manner. And when people are honest with us, when they have integrity, when they are genuine, we again feel as if we will put a lot of faith that we can interact with them and feel very safe. So these are the components that are behind our perception of whether another human being deserves our trustworthiness, whether we will interact with them. And any one of these may be, in fact, a breaker, a deal breaker in our willingness to interact with another human being. So again, all very intuitive. I'm also going to argue that where you are in the world, your culture, your upbringing, has a big effect of whether or not we weight these. 2 of them I mentioned are very much what we would call our competence. When we assess another individual, do they have the skills and abilities to do what we believe they do? And do they act in a manner that is predictable? So these are what we call cognitive factors. They're things we think about the competence of another human being. The other 2 are more of the character of the person. Do they act in a caring and empathetic manner? Are they telling the truth? Do they tell things that are in a truthful way? So this is at our heart. These are our effective characters. And I want to suggest that when we look at research on trust globally, all 4 of these are equally important, but where you are in the world will depend on the emphasis of where you might weight some of these. And if I were to ask the question, which I won't answer, which side of this continuum do you think Italy would fit into? I think you probably can answer that, but I've purposely not put Italy up here on this particular pendulum of what is weighted. But if you come and do work in the United States, if you teach as a university professor, what counts more is whether or not you have published, whether you have academic respect, whether you have capability in doing research and teaching, and do you do that on a regular basis? And if we go to other countries, of course, we respect the academic reputation of faculty, but we also emphasize and weight very much the character behind those individuals. Do they take an interest in the students? Are they truthful? Do they try and be fair and civil? So where we go in the world, the neuroscience of trust and psychological safety is identical, but these 4 factors are weighted differently depending on what culture, what country, what upbringing that we have. And when trust is broken, some of these are more important to restore than others. For those of you interested in more research in this area, I recommend a Harvard business professor. Her name is Erin Myers, and Erin Myers has written a book which I'm sure has been translated into Italian called The Culture Map. And she has written quite extensively, and as a professor of Harvard, her research looks at cultural concepts that are very universal. How do we get along with people from different countries? So this slide is adapted from some of Erin Myers' research in the interpersonal trust and psychological safety area. I want to stop and just see if there's any questions about the science, and I want to wind up very briefly to share an overview of 3 of our different assessments we've created, one at an organization level, one at a leader level, and one at a team level. And I'll be very brief about sharing this. There are many vendors and very many different assessments of trust, but I'll give you a quick overview of 3 that we have actually designed, developed, researched, and validated over the last several years. Are there any comments or questions right now that anyone would like to ask before I just share an overview of some of the assessments with the neuroscience behind oxytocin at their base?
Ken, I would just repeat in Italian what you said in the beginning.
Okay.
Feel free to also write questions in the chat. Dico ai presenti che il dottor Nowak all'inizio invitava chi desidera anche a fare commenti e a inserire domande nelle chat, perché non lo disturba mentre parla. Quindi se qualcuno ha piacere non solo di fare domande in questo momento, ma di scriverle, siete benvenuti.
Maybe I will proceed and we'll save some time at the very end if there's anything that you have written down or would like to ask. So I would like to kind of end my presentation with a very brief overview of assessments and how we can measure these particular concepts in individuals and teams. And I'm sure in your studies you've used and heard these terms called reliability and validity. And I'm not going to go into any detail with these. I want to suggest that we use these terms very loosely. You will talk to a vendor, you will talk to a researcher, and you will hear the words reliability and validity being used quite a bit. But what I want to argue is all of these words are very specific. There are 2 very, very well-known types of reliability. So when somebody may say, I've developed an assessment, I've developed a test, it's very reliable. The question you should be asking is, what kind of reliability are you talking about? And the word validity, as you can see here, there may be more, but it's divided into 2 very large kinds of validity. One we call construct validity, and that is, are we measuring concepts that are theoretically oriented in the tool and the assessment, and there's at least 3 very different kinds of construct validity. There's also a type of predictive validity, and we call this criterion related. Is the assessment or the test that we've designed and developed actually able to predict an outcome, to tell us something about the person or about their current or future behavior? So I share this slide because I'll use these words a few times on the next few minutes, but I want to caution you that when you read an article or you listen to a podcast, we will use these words. We have a reliable test, or this test has been shown to be valid. You must question as a student, you must question as a researcher, you must question as an employee in a company using these tests, to challenge who's developed it, to explain what kinds of validity does this particular assessment have. It may not have anything more than what we call face validity, and face validity is just a group of experts that would agree, this looks pretty good. We believe that it's measuring what it claims to measure, but I don't have any statistical evidence. I don't have any research evidence to really tell me whether or not this is in fact a very strong tool. So I just wanted to share these 2 words with you and to encourage you to put on your skeptical cap with people that you come across that have designed and developed tools, to keep asking the question, what kind of reliability, what kind of validity are you talking about? Please explain it to me. So with that, from a research perspective and backdrop, our model behind all of our tools is based on this idea that what organizations do and what leaders do can create either a release or an inhibition of oxytocin. How I treat people, how the professor would treat students, how you treat a life partner, a friend, a family member will either cause oxytocin to be released and will be reciprocated in a civil, caring, empathetic, and trusting manner, or you will create an environment with even a team of two of toxicity, of people not feeling safe to interact with you. So our model and belief in organizations is that how we treat organizational team members, how we treat direct reports, how we treat colleagues and peers will in fact create cultures and climates of trust. And we have found, as you'll see in a moment in our research, that organizations and teams that feel psychologically safe with each other and have a culture of trust actually have some outcomes that all of us care about. There's better performance, there's less stress, there's more innovation, and we do find that people want to stay with companies for a longer period of time. So this is the model that we have used on the creation of three very different types of assessment tools that we do work. And the first I'm going to just be very brief about to say we've created an organizational survey we call the O factor, and O stands for oxytocin. We have created this tool over the last 7 years, and it measures very specific categories of what leaders and organizations can do that either inhibit or cause oxytocin to be released. And we measure these particular factors. All individuals in an organization would complete the same survey. It is actually very brief, only is 26 total questions, and we measure very specific areas that come out of our research. And on the right side of the screen, we have a very advanced, we call it a dashboard or a platform that individuals in the organization that are in human resources or researchers can go and take a look at the summary of these 8 key factors that relate to trust in an organization and leadership practices. And we'll have a measure that is related to our international or global benchmarks or norms that we could say your company is higher or lower than others. What's more important, of course, is what is higher or lower within your particular company. So we have a great deal of research that suggests that companies, when we measure these 8 factors and some additional scales, who score high actually show some very positive work outcomes. So this would be an example of criterion-related or predictive validity, that if we can show that employees that work for a particular company rate that company very high on the scales, they will in fact stay with the company longer. We will find they are less burnt out at a mental health level. They'll have greater engagement and certainly will be more productive depending on how we measure productivity. So like much research and intuition, when we trust the leaders of our company, when we're excited about the mission and the vision and the values of the company we work for, when we're treated with civility, when we're treated with respect, we will do our best work. We will be as healthy as we possibly can. So our trust research mimics or is very similar to others that have published that really do indicate that one of the secrets of great companies is to create leadership practices and a culture where we feel safe, where we trust each other, and we can do our very best work to be authentic and genuine. So this is one of the measures we've created. It's a short scale, but every individual in an organization voluntarily would complete an online survey, and that data again would be summarized into a dashboard that we can give to human resources or the senior leaders to analyze and think about programs and training and coaching and interventions to help foster high trust and psychological safety within different groups, different departments, and with leaders to become more effective. So that is one level of an assessment we've created. We also have a tool we created that measures the exact same factors, but we measure this at a leader level. So we will take anybody in a leadership role that has direct reports, and we will do 2 things with this particular tool. We will measure these 8 factors. Again, these are the exact same factors that our organizational survey uses. But in this case, we will ask a leader to rate him or herself on each of these 8 factors, and simultaneously, we will gather data from the individuals they supervise. So the direct reports that report to this particular leader will complete the exact same questions, and we now have a very comfortable and very scientific way of comparing a leader's perception of how they believe they are treating their direct reports, and compare that to the experience and the perception of direct reports working for that leader. So in this way, we can sit down with a leader and provide a very extensive individual leadership report, and we can in fact compare and contrast self-ratings to those of direct reports to give leaders feedback on one or more of the 8 areas that they can modify, they can change at a behavioral level. So we refer to this as a 360-degree feedback. It really is just an upward feedback in this case. And we have found, in fact, that several of these scales in our research actually predict very strong performance. And the 3 out of the 8 that we found in a couple of our research studies that are more important than others are when leaders will take an interest and will develop and help an individual in their careers and their growth personally and professionally. We find that is very strongly related to employees feeling as if we've invested in them. It's the reciprocation of, I will stay with the company, I will do great work when my leader believes in me. We also find that leaders that provide a maximum amount of autonomy and independence, that's a signal of trust. If I will allow you to do your work on your time and to do it your way that's reasonable, but I hold you accountable to very high standards, and we've agreed on those standards ahead of time, it's again a currency of trust. And finally, universally, all of us would like praise. All of us like recognition. And this is a third very important factor of the 8 that we have found in our research is strongly, significantly related to high performance. A universal need, but one that many leaders don't do enough, that we again have found in our feedback. So with this particular tool, we would sit down with a leader and have a confidential meeting and to spend time to review the report and to compare their rating on any of the 8 factors and what direct reports experience of those 8. And we would then challenge in a positive way that leader to say, what will you work on? What will be one of the factors you can try to practice on the job and become more effective? And this is the response scale that we use in this particular leadership assessment tool. And this is an example of comparison on the 8 factors that we would sit down with the leader to say, what is your highest score and how do your direct reports experience you? What might be an opportunity that you could do some of these things more or less or differently, depending on your motivation to want to become a more effective leader. And this is what we will sit down with a great deal of data within this report, and we will sit with the leader to have them absorb and reflect and think about their motivation to work on one or more of these 8 factors to create high trust and psychological safety with their particular team and their direct reports. And we use a platform to help change behavior. We will ask leaders to think about one professional goal. What will be their commitment to become a more effective leader in creating a high trust and psychological safety leader? We've done quite a bit of research academically, and I've even written a book about this particular topic of how do we get leaders to consider wanting to be more effective. And we do know that no matter what the behavior is, if you want to be a better footballer or a better ballerina or a better artist, it takes practice. And we find in general, it takes about 90 days to work on something over and over before we see not just change at a brain level, but we actually see that people are more comfortable with a habit change. So we challenge leaders to think about practicing new behaviors for at least 90 days. And we will then, with a platform that we call Talent Accelerator, have individuals set a goal. We will remind them at 30 days and 60 days and 90 days. And at the end of a 90-day period, we will automatically send out a little, we call it a pulse survey, a little survey back to one of their direct reports to say, have you seen Patricia doing better in the particular leadership goal that she has been working on based on the feedback she received from our tool? So that is a second tool that we've designed and developed called a leadership team trust tool. And again, the goal is to provide individual leaders with very pointed and specific feedback from their direct reports to help them become and create cultures of high trust. And finally, I'll wind up today with my presentation to talk about our team tool. And again, when we have an intact, interdependent team, it could be a work team, a project team, a staff team, we will ask this team, are you functioning effectively? And the goal of this tool is to measure two very important foundations of effective teams that I've already spoken about. And one of those is to get a measure of psychological safety and trust, and the other is to get a measure of social or emotional awareness. And without either of these, we again find that teams will not function very well. Of course, there are other things teams need to do well, but these are the foundations in every theory and every model of teamwork we find universally in the organizational psychology literature. So again, at the team level, one of the things that we'll be looking at are the four factors, the four pillars, the four dimensions of trustworthiness. And we ask each team member to rate their behavior along these four. And we also ask each team member to rate every other team member on the exact same behavior. So if the professor and myself and Giancarlo and Patricia was a team of four, I would answer questions about how I believe I'm behaving, but I would also rate Professor, I would also rate Patricia, and I would also rate Giancarlo on my perception of how they're behaving as well. So we would take all of that data and we would roll it up into a feedback report to the team. And again, in a series of meetings, we would come back to the team and present the results from the perceptions the team members have in these four areas to discuss and to do some exercises and some team building to help the team really work through how we can overcome any of the barriers that will go into a very important foundation. So this is one part of our team assessment. And again, the results would be provided back to the team, and we could take a look at which of these of the four factors are ones we have to work on to become a more effective team. So this would be a report and a presentation and a set of meetings we would have with any team over a period of time. It could be several months to maybe even working with the team as a team coach for up to a year. We do find in the report we can actually characterize the functioning of the team. How effective are they? And we might, at the end of several months or a year, we may re-administer this team tool to be able to evaluate change at a team level. So we try and look at, again, not just an individual's perception, but everyone on the team's perception. And this gives us a very clever way of comparing, again, a team member's view of how they're behaving relative to the other team members that are interacting and experiencing that particular team member. The second part of our team assessment is one that we measure looking at emotional or social awareness. We, in fact, will give pictures of an individual's face, and there'll be 8 different emotions that we'll be showing to the team and each individual in the team. And these are based on core emotions, human emotions. And what we'll ask each individual to do in the assessment is to come up with a label, and we'll provide 4 labels next to these faces to identify what you think the emotion is that's behind this particular face. And we will then roll that up at a team level and we would be able to get a picture of to what extent are team members able to read the emotions of another person. Do I know when somebody is upset? Do I know when somebody is not paying attention? Do I know when somebody is very much overly talking and no one else can share? So this is the second part of our team assessment that measures social awareness. And we have found in our research that team members individually, when the team possesses a high level of emotional and social awareness, they function much better. And just some of our research, I won't go into any detail, we have found that when team members rate themselves high and they can correctly identify the emotions of others, we find it as correlated as a predictor of team satisfaction, overall job satisfaction, and importantly, how well the team is functioning. Although these correlations aren't dramatically high in the research literature in organizational psychology, they are very respectful. So again, we're not predicting every facet of how teams function, but we do find that team members that cannot read the social and emotional and nonverbal behavior of others actually get in the way of the team functioning real well. If you can't identify in your team and your partnership and your life when somebody's upset, when they're ill, when they're defensive, then you're not going to be able to cooperate and collaborate and solve problems in a way that we would expect at a team level. So these are the two components that we measure in our team tool: psychological safety and trust, and also social and emotional awareness. And I just want to end my presentation to suggest we're not the only vendor or company or researchers that do work, and these are some of the more well-known other tools that we find both academically and in organizational psychology worldwide. And almost all of these are translated into multiple languages. They measure different aspects of trust and psychological safety than we do, but all of them have been used in research studies as well. So I'm going to end with that, and if we have any time whatsoever, I respect that I've gone a little longer than perhaps I've been asked to, but let me stop and see if there's any discussion or questions anybody might have. And thank you again for allowing me to present to you today.
Thank you so much. You were perfectly on time, so and that's rare. So thank you so much. It has been very interesting. I think we have now a brief summary of the main points in Italian provided by the initiative team.
Certamente, è un piacere fare questa sintesi molto ricca di contenuti. Cercherò di essere efficace. Ken ha iniziato raccontando un pezzo, un inizio della sua vita, parlando di questo amore che ha nell'allevare, seguire, istruire cani che possano supportare le persone non vedenti. Quindi il concetto della persona che si affida completamente al cane. Relazione fortissima di fiducia che si va a instaurare, che porta quindi Ken a introdurre il secondo concetto, quello dell'affiliazione, che è costruita, basata all'interno del nostro DNA e che porta in un qualche modo a definirsi meglio collegamento e connessione sociale e senso di appartenenza, e quindi elementi predittivi di come la persona si possa sentire bene e a proprio agio con gli altri. Questo quindi lo ha portato in modo logico a introdurre in modo corposo il concetto di fiducia, che oggi come oggi, con esperienza Covid, a maggior ragione diventa elemento essenziale a livello globale e altrettanto nel lavoro da remoto, e ha proprio fatto l'esempio lui ai piedi dell'Oceano Pacifico in California, voi Torino, Giancarlo ed io siamo nel nord-est dell'Italia e di conseguenza a trovarci tutti. A questo punto siamo entrati nei concetti chiave della fiducia, i pilastri, quindi da un lato sicurezza psicologica che si unisce alla fiducia interpersonale e consapevolezza emotiva. È andato quindi a declinare cosa si intende per sicurezza psicologica, quindi quanto ci sentiamo sicuri nell'aprirci agli altri, quanto gli altri si pongono nei nostri confronti in termini di sicurezza interpersonale. Dopodiché ha aperto un focus sulle ricerche che hanno portato lui, assieme anche a Paul Zak, un altro ricercatore di fama mondiale, a operare in termini neuroscientifici, quindi risonanze magnetiche che hanno portato a osservare in primis come il dolore emozionale sia misurato a livello cerebrale come sofferenza fisica e quindi quanto sia importante questa attenzione e questa conoscenza in termini di leadership e quindi il primo collegamento forte con il mondo dell'impresa. Dopodiché ha approfondito come l'ossitocina, quindi questo ormone / neurotrasmettitore sia alla base della definizione della fiducia per parlare di fiducia interpersonale, quindi di empatia, e ha raccontato gli esperimenti che con Paul Zak per 20 anni hanno condotto proprio nel assegnare somme di denaro a persone che non si conoscono e che non sono collegate tra loro e come il dividere queste somme abbia portato a dei guadagni reciproci decisamente maggiori. E poi ancora in termini di verticalizzazioni pragmatiche sui componenti della fiducia, i famosi pilastri, quindi la capacità, la coerenza, il prendersi cura, la trasparenza, che sono stati presentati attraverso 3 strumenti che io personalmente come initiative da anni implemento presso aziende. Ne abbiamo proprio alcuni progetti in corso su questi 3 strumenti. Il primo strumento, quello O-Factor, che misura a livello organizzativo e quindi di cultura organizzativa quanto questa sia basata sulla fiducia. Abbiamo 26 domande in totale come Ken ha illustrato, molto semplici e molto forti, tenendo presente come ha sottolineato i criteri per andare a leggere gli strumenti. Da un lato reliability e dall'altra parte validity per andare meglio a comprendere la solidità dello strumento. O-Factor, quindi primo strumento a carattere organizzativo, secondo strumento NeuroView per misurare la leadership individuale dei leader andando a far compilare il questionario al leader gestore di persone e alle persone che il leader gestisce. E poi il terzo strumento, NeuroTeamView, quindi lo strumento per il team, basato di nuovo su 2 questionari estremamente rapidi, il primo legato a misurare sicurezza psicologica, il secondo consapevolezza emotiva con 8 visi che vanno quindi in un qualche modo a fotografare quanto le persone nel team sono capaci, consapevoli nel leggere le emozioni dei componenti del team. 90 giorni è il tempo codificato per attuare un comportamento nuovo, quindi a produrre una sorta di automatismo comportamentale, e quindi altrettanto il come fare per mantenere, diciamo così, la persona coinvolta nel proprio miglioramento individuale, a mantenere alta la tensione nell'implementazione del nuovo comportamento. Questa è una super sintesi di messaggi, passando anche per la fiducia letta a livello culturale a seconda della cultura dei popoli, che Ken, penso di poter dire, ci ha deliziato e che ha condiviso con noi.
Grazie mille, sintesi efficacissima. Ora lascerei spazio alle domande, sia dal pubblico. Ragazzi, se avete domande vi aiutiamo a tradurle, curiosità. Magari inizio io così rompo il ghiaccio. I start, so I break the ice.
Thank you, Claudia.
About these 90 days, I was really struck by this 90 day because it seems really encouraging. But I was wondering, because this afternoon we were talking about theories of change, and we were seeing with the students that there are so many factors that influence change. So I was wondering if in your experience some habits are easier to change than others. For example, or some abilities are easier to acquire than others. I'm imagining that emotional awareness may be harder than some other habits somehow to change, but I wanted to ask, what is your experience on this?
Yeah, I can share both an academic article and a popular article with you. And the brain science of behavior change is very fascinating. In fact, we believe there are two separate networks in the brain that are activated to get started on a new goal. And we find those that are most easiest to change would be those that are intrinsically motivating, those that you want to do more or less or differently. And those that we would identify as skills and abilities are more readily modified and changed than personality and things that are probably genetically predetermined. It's not to say you can't become more extroverted if you're introverted, or to become more agreeable and to be more kind if your genetics are to be more confident and aloof. But those are more difficult areas to create lasting change. And that's one of the reasons why we would say you must go through counseling and therapy and to have a long period of coaching before some of the behaviors that are very well set get a chance to change. The other area that our brain network is related to is not our motivation, but is our planning. It's our ability to set goals and to stick with goals over a period of time. So here's an illustration of behavior change I use when I'm teaching. We won't do this exercise, but for all of you that are listening today, you probably have a dominant hand. You're right-handed or you're left-handed. Some of you may be very blessed to be ambidextrous. You can use both hands equally. But the exercise that I like to do in a classroom is I will ask you to take a pen or a pencil and to give me your autograph, to sign your name with your dominant hand, and then to do the same thing with your non-dominant hand. And whoever is the fastest when you've completed this task, to stand up. And it is interesting to watch how quickly students will write their name, their full name, and do this very well with their dominant hand, but then struggle with their non-dominant hand. And we find that when we do something that's new, when we try to change our behavior, it is very difficult. Our brain is resistant to doing things that are different. And in fact, it makes us feel at a brain level uncomfortable, yet that is our greatest growth. So one of the assignments I'd like to give students is to purposely do things that make them uncomfortable, to go and meet somebody who's different from you, maybe a different culture, somebody that doesn't speak Italian very well, to find somebody that is older or very younger, somebody with a different religious or political background, and to do things that don't feel very comfortable, to get up in front of your class right now and to give a spontaneous speech, or go to a comedy club in Italy and try to be funny. These are all things that none of us feel comfortable doing, but at a brain level, they stimulate the greatest growth. And if we can reframe these as an opportunity to learn and to become better, we can develop new habits. So the question I would ask is, if you practice signing your name with your non-dominant hand, how long will it take the brain to create new neural networks to connect? So we have a phrase, I don't know how well it'll translate, we call neurons, the parts of our brain that are connected. Neurons that fire together are wired together. So we see that it takes about 6 to 8 weeks for, at a brain level, new neural circuits to connect. We have a fancy word for this. We call it neuroplasticity. So if any of you will begin to practice mindfulness meditation, and I use different ways to measure changes at a brain level, in 4 to 8 weeks, we can actually see different areas of your brain activating and working together. But it doesn't change your ability to be less stressed. It doesn't allow you to be calm in the face of work or life challenge. We would need to practice mindfulness meditation on average for 90 days until you feel comfortable. It would take you to practice daily 90 days to sign your name, to give me your autograph with your non-dominant hand before you would feel comfortable, particularly under pressure, to sign your name either with your dominant hand or non-dominant hand. So for those of you interested in corporate training, in executive coaching, even teaching, we will often provide a lecture, hear a speaker that is marvelous. We will all be very excited, but we find it as a very ineffective way of changing behavior. Without deliberate practice, on average, for complicated behaviors for about 90 days, we will not see very little or no change at a behavioral level. There's other research. I'll conclude by saying in England, if you ever go today to England, you will find very famous taxi cabs. And to become a driver in England, you must take a very difficult test. It's called the knowledge. And it is a measure of your ability to remember and recall every street and every alley and every corner in the United Kingdom. And this was before the days we could have our phones tell us where to go. On my phone, I'm a very terrible driver. This is why when I go to Italy, I let Giancarlo drive me everywhere. I get lost. And I have a little person in my phone that will yell at me all the time. And they use the same word. It's called recalculating. I don't know what they mean, but it's helping me to get where I need to go. So what I wanted to share is a research study in England actually looked at the brains of individuals that were professionally the taxi cab drivers in England, and found that the areas of their brain that were related to spatial awareness, spatial intelligence, it's the cerebellum, the area that we know and identify in the brain that are related to spatial relations, were very, very enlarged, meaning they use that brain muscle in their profession over and over. That's not very surprising, but the same researchers went and looked at the brains of individual taxi cab drivers that had retired. They no longer were practicing becoming a taxi cab driver, and they found that the areas of the brain that they had measured before had actually shrunk in volume and mass. So one thing we know about habit change is if you will stop practicing those new behaviors you learned, you will eradicate the ability to perform. So we must keep up our daily health and non-health practices in order for this to become what we call a habit. So a very long answer to your question.
Thank you so much. I think we will talk about it again next week in class, because I will give a task to perform for 90 days of a behavior, and we'll see what happens. And also I want to close here because I've been told that there are no other questions, so I don't want to take to take up other time. I just wanted to thank you so much because as I was saying in the beginning before you arrived, it's a very nice example of putting together research and practice. In Italy, we have the tendency as psychologists, once we finish university, to start practicing and to stop research. And we use the tools that are there, but we mostly don't persist. We do not attempt to create new tools and to measure new constructs. So I think this is a very, very nice example of how to keep up your curiosity and to build new instruments to assist in your practice, because then of course you can better accompany leaders and teamworks in their job. So thank you very, very much. Grazie agli studenti per il loro
c'è ancora
tempo.
una domanda? Forse c'è una domanda?
Oh, fantastico. We have a question.
Fantastico.
Buonasera a tutti. Ero curiosa di sapere la vostra, diciamo, la vostra impressione riguardo alle organizzazioni con cui avete avuto a che fare, quindi se effettivamente c'è sicurezza psicologica all'interno delle organizzazioni, perché dalla mia esperienza lavorativa vedo che ancora è carente questo aspetto, e poi volevo sapere quali sono, secondo gli effetti, i benefici che si ritrovano all'interno di un'organizzazione dove effettivamente c'è un tipo di clima rispetto invece ad altre in cui questa cosa manca. Grazie mille.
May I answer, or may I translate? Let's say the question was on how psychological safety is felt, perceived within the organization on one hand. On the other hand, the question emphasized consequences, advantages, above all, on the presence of trust within the organization. So, what is the level organizations feel psychological safety and advantages for the organization in terms of trust, and culture? Would you like me to say something in Italian first, and then you can add?
Yeah, go ahead, Patrizia.
Prima di tutto, sicurezza psicologica nelle organizzazioni, a nostro vedere, è elemento di forte sviluppo. Devo dire, fino a qualche anno fa c'era una consapevolezza, diciamo così, più meno radicata, e quindi la si misurava meno. Oggi come oggi viene a essere misurata, c'è forte spazio ancora di miglioramento, con la convinzione che sia un elemento forte per sviluppare le persone, per trattenere i talenti e per essere azienda attrattiva. Per quanto riguarda i vantaggi di culture di fiducia, sicuramente riduzione dello stress, aumento della produttività, aumento della capacità di stare con gli altri in ottica condivisione e creazione di valore, sono alcuni forti vantaggi che noi misuriamo quotidianamente nelle aziende nelle quali operiamo. Ken, would you like to add? I said something on how companies and organizations are bettering in terms of awareness on the importance of psychological safety. And then I mentioned a stress reduction, increase of productivity, increase of effectiveness in teams, in sharing information, and added value creation as plus of cultures where trust is measured and present.
Yeah, I don't know if I have anything to add. Our research and others absolutely demonstrates, as I mentioned with Google and their study many years ago, that the presence of psychological safety does not guarantee that a team will be high performing, but the lack of psychological safety is a predictor of very poor performance, a high level of burnout and stress. So it is one of the reasons in our assessment tool and our research, we emphasize this to begin our team coaching and our team development work to ensure it is available and present, that I feel comfortable to ask a question, that I feel comfortable to debate with you, and I feel comfortable to have conflict in a positive way. So this is our emphasis and our focus. It is not to disagree that our other aspects of teamwork are not important. Process, procedures, the tools, the clarity of roles, all of those play a very big part. But we see psychological safety and trust as a minimum condition for effectiveness.
Okay.
Thank you so much for all this time, and thank you, students, for the questions. I think now you're free to go. It has been a long afternoon for them. We've been here since 2:30, so.
Wow.
But I think it was really, really interesting. There are a lot of inputs that we will deepen in the next weeks. And I hope we will get another chance to talk and work together, because I would really love that.
I would like that too. I will send a copy of my slides to Pratita and Giancarlo to pass to the students. And if there's any students that have additional questions, they can reach out to me. And if there's anybody on your students or faculty that would like to use our tools for research purposes, please let me know. I would invite that, and we would make these available to students, obviously, for free.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Grazie Patrizia, grazie Giancarlo, grazie a tutti.
Grazie.
Grazie. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm going to go and go to my next meeting since we're beginning our day here, but I look forward to continuing our conversation. So thank you very much for setting this up and allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Claudia. Bye. All right.
Grazie a tutti.